All right, so I'm back. It's been a while since I've been on the old YouTubes, but that's because my wife and I just gave birth. She gave birth. I didn't do anything. To our baby daughter, and she's here and she's healthy. Here she is. She's pretty cool. Anyway, I'm here actually to talk about my other baby, the Canon C70. I've used it on a handful of shoots now, a personal project, some weddings, a couple corporate jobs, and I feel like I got a really good handle on it, and I wanted to share my thoughts with you, the internet. I actually shot a personal project about the birth of my daughter. It was really a great opportunity to use this camera and put it through its paces, and I'm actually going to link that in the description below. So I've been a Canon user for a really long time. The 7D back in the day, the 5D of course, the C100, C200, big fan of that. And then recently we picked up the R5, great camera, but the C70 was something I was very interested from the jump because it's smaller, has a great image still, has the same sensor as the C300 Mark III, which sounds crazy, especially in such a small body. But with that small size, with all those cinema camera features in it, I was very interested. So we picked one up and it did not disappoint. The C200 was quite big and beefy. The R5 is quite small. C70 seems to be right in that perfect sweet spot in between those two cameras. The button layout is very intuitive. If you've used a Canon cinema camera before, you'll be very at home here. All the buttons are where you'd expect them to be. The on-camera display is clearer than something like the C200. Great size, responsive to touch. For some people, the monitor might feel a little small. If I was doing more commercial shooting, I probably would add an external monitor, which I'm actually in the market for. So if you know of any good ones, let me know in the comments below YouTube. My only real complaint from the physical part of this camera is the lack of an EVF. That would have been really nice, but for the size compromise, it makes sense. And the top handle, I haven't used it. I unboxed it, felt it, feels a little dinky. I probably will use it at one point, but I just haven't yet. But it's nice that it's included. Okay, RF lenses. So this camera is Canon's first cinema camera with an RF mount. I've never used an RF lens. I've heard they're great, haven't used it once. So I can't really share many thoughts. I mean, I like that there's the mount and the options it gives, but I don't have experience with those lenses, so this part is pointless. Okay, next I want to talk about something a little interesting that Canon did. That's the speed booster that they announced alongside this camera. So it's a first-party adapter for EF lenses to work on RF bodies. Great. Also, it's a speed booster. This is a super 35mm sensor, so if you put, say, a 35mm lens onto that, it acts more like a 50 because of the crop. So if you put this speed booster on, it actually brings the field of view much closer to something like full frame. Really handy if you're using other cameras that are full frame to just get a matching field of view. It does give you an extra bit of light, which is really great. The bokeh doesn't change, so don't think that this piece of glass is magically giving you an actual full frame sensor. It doesn't quite work that way, but it's super great to have. I really like having it. Internal ND filters. This one's a big one for me. It's probably the biggest pro to a cinema camera over something like a mirrorless. I'm actually really impressed because the camera is quite small and somehow Canon figured out some magic way to put these ND filters in there, and it's great. You still have the option in the menus to extend it to up to 10 stops of ND, which is great. You get a little color shift, but you can fix that later as long as you're aware of it. So next up, the sensor. This is a DGO sensor, dual gain output. It's a Super 35 sensor. It's very, very clean. That DGO sensor really gives you a clean image. At ISO 800, you get 16 stops of dynamic range, and it's quite noise-free. It's really impressive. One of the reasons I loved shooting on the C200 was because through using their raw light, you could get C-Log2, which has 15 or 16 stops of dynamic range, which is one of the biggest things for me. And the biggest downside of that, though, was the noise. It was quite noisy in the shadows. This camera blows that one out of the water in terms of noise. Really, really happy with the image that I'm able to get and the lack of noise. Okay, so next up, I want to talk about the monitoring features. So this comes with everything you'd expect in a cinema camera. You have peaking, you have zebras, focus assist, you have waveform monitor. All of that's so handy, and I'm glad it's there, but the new thing that I have never really used that much, which has been available on external monitors and other cameras before, is the false color. So at the press of a button, you turn it on and your image looks crazy. And that's because it is assigning a color to every value range on an IRE scale. So essentially you can look at the image and at a glance, you can see where your shadows are being too crushed and where your highlights are being blown out. And you can find where that sweet spot is for skin tones. So handy to be able to just look at the image and know exactly where you're sitting, especially if you need to shoot in a run and gun environment and get a really quick exposure and want to make sure your skin tones are right. So great. Next up, I want to talk about the autofocus. It's good, really good. The C200 was fine. The R5 is really good. This is somewhere in the middle. The tracking is quite good for situations like this. It's on right now. Tracks me just fine. I wouldn't buy this camera for that feature. So if autofocus is important to you, maybe don't look at the C70. But if it's just like kind of a bonus, then you'll be very happy. Okay, next up, audio. So another feature about cinema cameras that is amazing is having onboard high quality audio inputs like XLR. This camera is too small for that. They can't quite fit XLR ports on there, so we get mini XLR. I've never used this before. The ports are in a really convenient spot. The only downside is in a situation like this, if I'm looking at the flip out screen that's pointed at me, the mini XLR input is right blocking it. Can't see my face. So you'll see here, this is my view. And this, really annoying. Don't love that. But what can you do? Next up, I want to talk about the shooting modes. This has a really high quality 4K. It's an MXF codec, MXF AVC? No, AVC, XF AVC. There's too many letters, but it's great. Looks amazing. It's 10-bit color, which is really nice. The file sizes aren't outrageous. You can also shoot in 24 frames per second, of course, through 60, 120. And I think if you go into 2K mode, you can also shoot even higher frame rates. I don't do that much. I'm not a big 120 person, but I'm happy that all the usual suspects are there. And it's nice that you have those high frame rate options if you ever need it. So 128 gigabyte SD card gets you about 105 minutes. Again, those file sizes aren't too crazy or unwieldy. In post, in your editor, it might be a bit chunky, it might drop some frames as you edit it. I'm on an M1 MacBook Pro, and I haven't seen drop frames hardly at all. If I stack too many clips on top of each other, maybe, with LUTs and everything applied, but it hasn't been an issue. I haven't had to optimize it ever. So battery life, another huge plus about cinema cameras. I have 2 of the batteries that last me a good, 4 or 5 hours per charge of shooting. More than enough for a full day of shooting. I rarely even use 1.5. It's kind of crazy to me. There are so many amazing cameras on the market. So the fact that I'm just talking about this one, it's kind of ridiculous. All of these cameras produce amazing images. This one is just one I really enjoy using. And the longer I shoot, I've been doing this 15 years now, and the longer I shoot, the more it becomes about what makes just my life easier, what makes my job easier. So this, of course, yes, the image, great, dynamic range, awesome, really happy with all that. But the biggest thing is it is a joy to use, and I want to reach for it to shoot instead of being like my C200 was getting to the point where I was kind of like, ugh. It was a thing that I stopped being excited to use. And the C70 is really, really enjoyable. So I hope this helps. If you liked this video, like and subscribe, YouTube. Let me know if you like these gear talking videos. I'm not a huge gearhead, I like it, but I'm not crazy knowledgeable. So let me know in the comments below if I should do more of these or if you want to see different types of videos. That would be cool. And I'll see you in the next one.